Hello, welcome. Today we are going to test Uzuy, the new Nintendo Switch emulator for Android that has been gaining attention for its performance. For those wondering why I use this project instead of Sudachi, let me give you a reason. Uzuy Edge has versions designed to function as benchmarks, which means that Android unleashes even more potential from the device when using this app. Additionally, there have been several updates focused on performance, such as the 25% resolution scale, which also allows for even lower emulated CPU and GPU accuracy. This means that although there may be issues, more basic devices will be able to run the games. Before proceeding with the tests, let's talk about some controversies surrounding the project. Firstly, since it's not a project with a GitHub page, it's impossible to track the progress of the emulation, and more importantly, it's unclear what exactly has been modified. But as you can see now, the latest version scanned by VirusScan, a site that uses various antivirus services, shows no threats. I tested it on my device, and nothing unusual occurred, but still, download and use it at your own risk. Although emulator Discord communities are usually toxic, I visited the Uzuy Discord and the developer Phoenix was very helpful. I noticed that he is always responding and answering questions from the community, which I consider a very positive point. He even allowed me, without me asking, to post my videos on his Discord. Additionally, he has appeared in a video on my channel to thank me for talking about his project in the past. The project, in its current version 0.5 to 12, recently added modes for low CPU and GPU accuracy, as mentioned earlier. Features such as the ASTC decoding method, which improves loading times, and ASTC texture quality options, allowing you to choose between better visuals or performance, have also been included. The OpenGL API is beginning to be implemented, although it is still in the experimental phase. Additionally, there is a native RAM counter, which won't be visible in my tests as I used earlier versions of the project. A function similar to the PC version of Uzuy has also been added, allowing the device to switch between RAM usage modes, like conservative and aggressive. Given all these improvements, it's clear that Phoenix knows what he's doing and doesn't seem to be just copying code from other projects. But now you might be wondering, is it worth uninstalling Sudachi and migrating to Uzuy Edge? These are the tests and impressions we'll discuss in today's video. Before starting the tests, if you like this type of content, don't forget to leave a like so that this video reaches even more people. And if this is your first time on the channel, consider subscribing for more content. Let's talk about the setup used before the tests. We're using a ROG Phone 6 with 8GB of RAM, equipped with a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 GPU. To load the games, we're using a USB 3.1 connected flash drive, with a read speed of 500 MB per second. The Antutu version of Uzuy was used, and the tests are not affected by capture software, as we're using a capture card to record the gameplay at 60 FPS. The turnip driver used in compatible games was Revision 21, the latest one available. I'll leave a link in the video description on where to get the drivers for Adreno GPUs. As for the emulators, all are using the same configuration. In Uzuy, we're using the aggressive memory profile to match Sudachi, since Sudachi doesn't have a way to control the RAM usage by the emulator. I'm using TV mode in most games, with 1080p resolution in most of them. When using a resolution lower than 1080p, I'll mention it during the gameplay. I'm not using any video editing techniques to speed up or slow down parts of the gameplay. With that said, let's get to the tests. Let's start with a game that will run on almost any device, and in my case, it was no different. I noticed that shader compilation might be slower on Uzuy during the first few seconds of game, but after that, the performance is similar. As you can see, even using a PlayStation 4 controller connected via Bluetooth, there are no delays or input issues, and I can execute parries without any problem in both emulators. Speaking of controls, both projects can automatically configure the controller, so there's no need to map each button manually. Vibration doesn't work in either project. In Dragon Ball FighterZ, this is where the problems began. Sudachi, since the latest updates, is unable to run the game, which crashes at the start of a match. Even with the fix and update, the issue isn't resolved, whereas in the latest versions of Uzuy, the game used to run fine. However, this problem doesn't occur in Uzuy, and the game runs normally. For the first time, the character life bars work correctly. In no version of Uzuy or any other Android emulator did they work. So, the conclusion is that Uzuy is the best project for running this game so far. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, along with its JIT recompiler, which presents many freezing issues on my device, the game has problems in both projects. For those who don't know, NC can only be executed in 64-bit games, and there are some ported Wii U games like Mario Kart 8 and New Super Mario Bros. That still use 32 bits, thus being incompatible with NC. These freezes are not due to shaders being compiled, it's a compatibility issue with my device, and only the latest version of Uzuy can run this game without issues for me. In my case, there were more problems in Uzuy than in Sudachi. So if I were to play just this game, I would choose Sudachi. There were no other types of problems, and in both projects, I was able to complete an entire race from start to finish. Another game that presents severe problems on my device is Red Dead Redemption. Previously, the game wouldn't even start, and would crash right after the initial cutscene. Now, I can get to the in-game status, but I still have issues like objects disappearing suddenly and performance drops, even using only 50% of the Nintendo Switch resolution. Comparing the projects, it's inevitable to notice that Uzuy performs slightly better, despite having worse accuracy. Therefore, Uzuy will have more FPS displayed on the screen, but many more objects will disappear or not render correctly. I'm not sure if this game is at the playable status. Super Mario Odyssey running at 75% resolution impressed me. While I can run the game in 1080p in Cascade Kingdom, in Metro Kingdom, known for being the most demanding kingdom in terms of processing power, concessions have to be made, and the resolution must be lowered to 75% for the game to maintain decent stability. Testing the game on Uzuy, I noticed a decent performance gain of nearly 10 FPS, now keeping the game close to the desired 60 FPS. Additionally, I observed lower GPU usage on Uzuy compared to Sudachi, without precision issues. Uzuy managed to blend good performance without sacrificing graphical quality in this title. And here we have a good example of why it's always useful to have multiple projects, even if they aim to do the same thing. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate crashes on the initial menu in Uzuy and doesn't allow you to enter the game, while in Sudachi, it runs perfectly. As you can see in this capture with 6 CPUs competing against each other, Sudachi doesn't have stuttering issues when compiling shaders or other graphical problems. I haven't tested if it's possible to enter the World of Light mode, as Uzuy for PC had problems running this mode for a long time. Super Mario Wonder, which was problematic to run on Uzuy at its launch, has long been completely fixed. On Android, we have perfect gameplay, especially with Uzuy, offering an experience with fewer FPS drops while using the same amount of resources. No graphical issues or anything compromising the visual quality of the game were noted. In Zelda Breath of the Wild, Uzuy truly surprised me. Although I wasn't running the game at 1080p, I was using a 75% resolution, and the results were the most impressive achieved on Android so far. Despite Uzuy having slightly more issues compiling new shaders compared to Sudachi, once everything is compiled, the results are remarkable, with gameplay where most of the time, we have 30 FPS. Sudachi also didn't disappoint, showing similar performance. One thing noted is that the water isn't rendered correctly in Uzuy, while in Sudachi, it is rendered properly. During about 10 minutes of gameplay, either project used all available RAM, preventing the game from closing unexpectedly. The choice between the two depends on your device. If you have a device strong enough, use Sudachi for better water rendering and lower RAM usage, otherwise, use Uzuy, which will also provide a great experience with some visual sacrifices. Lastly, I tested Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It was necessary to use a resolution of 75% to maintain an acceptable frame rate in both projects. Again, Uzuy's performance impressed me, with a situation similar to Breath of the Wild. When comparing shader compilation, Sudachi is still faster, but in all other aspects, Uzuy has the advantage, except for RAM usage. Uzuy generally offers more frames in most of the game's environments, and the water is rendered correctly, without graphical issues. However, I noticed that Uzuy started closing applications I was using in the background, like the Asus HUD that shows game performance, something that didn't happen with Sudachi. In all tested games, Uzuy also showed a higher temperature, but without any thermal throttling. The memory issue might have been resolved by changing a default setting in Uzuy, and for this reason, I prefer this project for Tears of the Kingdom. In conclusion, Uzuy had superior performance in most games. However, when comparing shader compilation, Uzuy falls behind. As mentioned earlier, no strange behavior was observed with the project. Since the creation of this script, Uzuy now has a web page, which adds much more credibility for those who previously doubted the project. If you encounter any issues, you're likely to have a great experience, as I did on the project's Discord. During my tests, I used the project at standard resolutions, but it's important to note that Uzuy was developed for weaker hardware than mine, where the emulator might perform even better. Overall, I can say that the project is authentic and good, but it still needs a public repository to be 100% reliable. One improvement I would recommend for the project would be the implementation of the RAM leak fix and lower RAM usage, already implemented in Sudachi. If this fix is public, Uzuy could simply implement it and credit the Sudachi developer. And that's it for the video, everyone. I hope you found it useful. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.